We are back, and we are joined now by Hasan Ali, journalist covering U.S. foreign policy and South Asian politics, whose recent piece in The Nation is entitled "The Unexpected and Uncertain Result of Pakistan's Elections." We have a little bit of a delay, so people listening, just be mindful of that. Hasan, thank you so much for coming on the program.
My pleasure, Emma. How are you?
I'm doing well. I hope you are as well. Let's start with Imran Khan. We'll start fairly broadly for those who may not be familiar with who he is, what he represented when he became prime minister, up into the constitutional, crisis that saw him removed from power and then imprisoned. If you could just take us through that that history, that recent history.
Sure, yeah. Where does one begin with Imran Khan? I mean, like, I guess the first thing that you have to say is that he is the Pakistani celebrity, right? I mean, he's like the most famous man in this country, and has been for the best part of 40 years. He was, I mean, I know cricket hasn't really watched, it's not considered a real sport in the US, but, I mean, in the Commonwealth and the former colonies, it's kind of a big deal. So he was the cricket captain of the Pakistan national team, and he led the team to glory when it won the World Cup in 1992. Now, I mean, the country's only been around since 1947, so I mean, this is one of the milestones in Pakistan's history. So he basically cemented his title as like as a hero in the eye of the public a pretty long time ago. And his political sort of fortunes have been patchy. He's essentially, like a right-wing populist in the mold of Donald Trump, I would say. I mean, like, that is the person that he's been compared to most of all. People in America kind of find that a little bit unsettling when I say that. But, I mean, I think Trevor Noah was the first person who made the analogy, made the comparison, and it holds. He was co-opted or promoted by the Pakistan Army sometime after 2013. Because the Pakistan military establishment had really poor relations with the two main political parties in Pakistan, which is the PMLN and the PPP. I mean, they'd hung one of their leaders, Mr. Bhutto, and exiled another. And so, like when Nawaz Sharif won the 2013 election, the Pakistan military kind of started to cultivate Imran Khan as this kind of like third way candidate, this person who could sort of rid Pakistan once and for all from like these sort of like from the grips of these dynastic political parties. Fast forward to 2018, and in a really controversial election, Imran Khan became prime minister. Nawaz Sharif at the time was jailed just in the run-up to the election, so Mr. Khan and the army sort of created what later became known as the hybrid regime, right? Which was essentially the military would take, substantive policy decisions, and then they'd need, like a political leader, a popular political leader to kind of carry the can, to take responsibility. And for 4 years, it sort of, they kind of did that. Problem is that if the power resides with a whole bunch of generals who are, never in the public eye, and then the person who has to carry the can for their policies is someone who's got to get reelected, I mean, you can see how that sort of works, right? Like, I mean, eventually you're going to fall out, and that's what happened. General Qamar Javed Bajwa, who is the chief of army staff, then sponsored a vote of no confidence against Mr. Khan in April 2022. They'd fallen out spectacularly, even though they'd been, like sick as thieves for the best part of, like 4 years. And from then on, Mr. Khan just became like the anti-army candidate. I mean, he went on this speaking tour, basically accusing the Pakistan army of collaborating with the CIA to topple his government. And that's the sort of atmosphere in which, the May the 9th riots happened. I don't know how much your listeners will know about those. Essentially, Imran Khan was arrested, and his supporters went on this large-scale protest. Some of those protests turned violent, and those protests were against the military, right? So they attacked a bunch of military buildings and the military just went after them. They went after Imran Khan and his party. Something like 10,000 of his activists were thrown in jail. 100 of his sort of party stalwarts were forced to defect. The ones who remained loyal to him were, roughed up, thrown in jail. A lot of them are still in jail. A lot of them were forced underground. And so this was the sort of the atmosphere that led up to the 2024 general election. There are two important things that happened just before the election, just leading up to it, and those are worth mentioning. The first is that the PTI, the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, which is the name of Imran Khan's political party, so it had its symbol stripped from it, right, which was a cricket bat. Now the symbol is there are about 60 million people in Pakistan who are classified as illiterate. The symbol basically is the picture on the ballot that tells people who can't read or write where to tick, where to place their cross on the ballot paper, essentially. The other thing it does, though, is if you strip a party of a political symbol in that way, it effectively means that party no longer exists. It ceases to exist. So it's sort of like all the candidates who were formerly PTI were running as independents, right? So that's a huge disadvantage in a place like Pakistan. And then finally, with a week to go to the poll, Imran Khan was convicted in 3 separate court cases. The first was he was sentenced in a case which was to do with his mishandling of a diplomatic cable. And then he was convicted in another case which was to do with financial corruption. And bizarrely, he was convicted in a third case, which was to do with not having contracted a marriage in accordance with Islamic law. And all of this happens, within the space of 4 or 5 days. Pretty obvious what was going on. I mean, the sort of powers that be wanted to make him as unpopular as they possibly could with a whole bunch of constituencies in the country, like the religious right, for instance, the patriotic sort of, foreign policy buffs, if you know what I mean. And the thing is, the expectation, therefore, was that last Thursday's polls would be a foregone conclusion, like an easy victory for the PMLN. But the people of Pakistan had different ideas. They still came out and voted for Imran Khan. They found a way.
I mean, so there's so much there. 1, 2, Khan has accused the CIA. Sorry. Oh, Khan has accused the CIA of orchestrating his removal from office. It's well documented, right, that the United States does not like Imran Khan. I know that Ryan Grimm and Murtaza Hussain had a big story last year about the fact that there was a State Department document that showed that they would basically prefer if Imran Khan was no longer in power because of his position on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. That's interesting to me. I'm also interested in, the Donald Trump characterization. Is it fair to say that from a political perspective? I mean, what are his politics? And why is he not basically the U.S.'s favorite, I guess? And also, what does he represent politically within the context of Pakistani politics?
So let me take the first one, your first question. I mean, you were talking about, you were discussing sort of the story that Ryan Grimm and Murtaza Hussain wrote in The Intercept, right? I mean, I'm familiar with their reporting, and I respect them a lot as journalists. They're much more experienced than I am. But I remain unconvinced by this, just simply because, everybody knows that, everybody knows that the U.S. has been involved in regime change, throughout the world. This is not new information. I mean, it's happened all over the world. My issue is, if you really did want to topple Imran's government, why would an undersecretary of state go and have a conversation with the Pakistani ambassador, whose job it is to then relay this information to Imran Khan, right? Sounds like a pretty stupid conspiracy if that's what it is, like pretty incompetent. I mean, one thing I will say about the State Department, I haven't dealt with them much. They don't seem like stupid people to me. The State Department and the Pentagon have had a direct line to general headquarters in Rawalpindi for just about as long as I've been around, probably longer. Why didn't they do that? You know, I mean, why would you go to the ambassador, whose job it is to then report to the civilian government?
Sure, sure.
So that's why yeah.
We can be skeptical, I think.
That's why I'm unconvinced by it.
I don't think we need to be convinced by the coup, the coup claim, right? But like we can agree essentially that the United States wasn't thrilled with Imran Khan. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the reason for that, which goes to the second part of your to the second part of your question, you asked me why that might be the case, right?
Right. Right.
Look, when we talk about populism in the context of Pakistani politics, what is the number one thing that sells? Well, there are a couple of things that sell. You know, I mean, if for a politician who wants to reach out to his voter or wants to bring people to his side, there are two main things that sell and have sold for nigh on 50 years. Anti-Americanism is number one, and probably, you know, like religious orthodoxy as a binding force, that's probably number two, okay? So, I mean, yes, Imran Khan has been critical of the United States in a very public way for virtually his entire political career, you know, I mean, and I mean, I wrote a piece in The Nation when he was still prime minister, before his relationship with the military essentially became fraught, saying that he planned to fight the next election as an anti-America candidate. That was going to be what he was going to do. That's how he was hoping to win the 2024 election. It turned out to be true, but not perhaps in the way that I thought it had. I mean, your question about this, what Imran Khan's politics represents,
right?
In
Pakistan
is a really interesting one.
Yeah, it's. I know it's difficult to create some sort of guidepost based on like a very American context, but you know, I'm just trying to get a broader sense of the PTI and Khan and why, you know, they had the hearts and minds to the degree, like we're kind of burying the lead. They did incredibly well, and despite all of this interference in the election, including the shutting down of the internet and of the of cell phone service on election day.
Absolutely, and you know, like they have to be commended because they ran a brilliant insurgent campaign. Their technology teams are you know, like very, you know, their digital media teams particularly did a fantastic job. I mean, what PTI represents, right? And this is part of the reason why the military fell out with them and fell out with Imran Khan. But what they represent essentially is the same thing that the military has always tried to represent. Okay? The military has always had three main ideological sort of narratives that it's promoted to gain popularity as an institution. Pakistan is a country full of disparate ethnicities and languages, you know, I mean, and so one of the things the military has always wanted is strong central government, strong power concentrated in the center, essentially, right? So that's one thing. The second thing is the military has always believed in Islam as a binding force for society. And then the third thing that the military has always believed in is hyper-nationalism, you know. There's a forever war going on with our eastern neighbor, India, you know, like, and that sort of, you know, like forms a large part of, you know, like the nationalistic identity in Pakistan. Well, look, Imran Khan believed in all of those things, but because he's a charismatic politician, he was able to embody all of those ideas better than the faceless institution that is the Pakistan Army, right?
Right.
And because he became like a better representative of all of those ideas, he also became incredibly dangerous. And this is why, I mean, the really interesting thing, Emma, is, I mean, I remember, I was much younger then, but I mean, I remember the Musharraf years, the Musharraf dictatorship, right? And there were always a whole bunch of people. There was always a segment of society based, I mean, you'd call them sort of middle class, upper middle class, military brats, people who, you know, like had some affinity towards the West, that thought that General Musharraf was pretty good for Pakistan, right? Virtually all of those people ended up supporting Imran Khan, right? So you can sort of see the synergy between like the military establishment and Imran Khan for a while. But then you can also see why they, but then you can also see why they fell out so spectacularly, because Khan is just better at all the things the military wants to be good at, right? In terms of,
is it
promoting
a threat?
A message.
His popularity as a figurehead, and perhaps the fact that he's more populist in the way he in the way he brands himself, less controllable. Is that part of the fallout?
Well, I mean, absolutely. And let's be fair to the guy. Whether you like his politics or not, he's incredibly resilient. He's the only political leader in this country, perhaps after Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, who was able to bring together, people from every province in this country of disparate identities. And there is a part of him that sort of transcends, the way in which politics has traditionally been conducted in this country. He has managed to reflect the aspirations of the majority of Pakistan's voting population, or the majority of people who turn out to vote. And that's commendable. But yes, he is uncontrollable, and he is self-guided, and he is willing to do pretty much anything in the pursuit of power.
And so where does that leave now that first, what did the results show? I mean, we've kind of hinted at it, but what were the results, and where does that leave Pakistan today?
Gosh, what does one say to that? I mean, the phrase "eternal recurrence of the same" sort of, comes to mind when discussing Pakistani elections. I mean, I think every reporter who reports on Pakistan is destined to tell the same story for their entire careers. What happened on election day was essentially this: the polls closed somewhere around sorry, I beg your pardon. The polls closed somewhere around 5 p.m. Okay. 3 or 4 hours after the polls closed, we started receiving like a whole bunch of results. These were media projections, but they were based on solid reporting on the ground. And Imran Khan, it was clear, had won a sensational victory. I mean, it was either, he was leading commandingly in a whole bunch of constituencies, many more than he ended up winning. And then mysteriously, the Election Commission of Pakistan issued a statement or briefed reporters that all the results that were coming on the television were wrong. And they're then sort of, what succeeded this was this kind of like interval of several hours when we received no results at all, which made everyone really suspicious, because we know what that usually means, right?
Right.
And by the time in the early hours of Friday morning, we started to get results again, a lot of the seats where PTI was leading had flipped, and they'd gone to PMLN. And I just want to make one point. A lot of your listeners, might not be familiar with, the electoral system in Pakistan, right? Under Pakistan's parliamentary democracy, you don't actually have to flip that many seats to make a huge difference, right? So let's say out of 266 seats, the results of 20 were manipulated. They went from one party to another. Well, that's already a difference of 40, right? Because, one party has 20 fewer and the other party has 20 more. And it is the difference between forming a government and not forming a government, as it turns out. You asked me about the results, Emma. I mean, my question to you is like, the official results, what do they tell us? The official results tell us that something strange has happened. What does this election tell us? This election tells us something very different. This election tells us that the people of Pakistan are a bit too savvy to be fooled by this, and that they're essentially democratic. That's another thing. I mean, the big criticism of Pakistani sort of voters, and I don't think it's a fair criticism, is that they don't get out on the streets and, they don't protest for their democratic rights. It's very difficult to do when, there's such a huge gap between your aspirations and your socioeconomic status and that of the people, whether it's Imran Khan or Nawaz Sharif or anyone else who will end up governing you. But they still defied pretty much every tactic in the book. I mean, PTI, I talked about, like repetitive elections, like the same story repeating itself again and again and again. The one thing that I think is worth pointing out is this level of repression is unprecedented in Pakistan's history, and this level of manipulation is unprecedented as well. So what it says for Pakistan,
and the opposition to it signaled a deep understanding of trying to push back against that democratically.
Yeah, absolutely. But then there's another point that also needs to be remembered, which is something like 40% of Pakistan's population is considered young. Okay, are young people. Like they're under the age of 35. They're a bit more hopeful, a bit less cynical, and they're also thick and feel no affinity towards the politics of the other two main parties. I mean, those parties are dynasties, right? They're political dynasties. I mean, what will happen if whenever the PMLN comes into power, you find like 5 members of the same family holding like 5 of the top posts in the land, right? And the PPP is exactly the same. You had Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, then you had his daughter, now you have her son, and her husband's been president and will be president again. And her husband's sister will probably be like the chief minister of Sindh or something, right? People have had enough, like Imran represents, at least in his person, represents a break from that, and there is some merit in that, I think, and I think it's impressive that he managed to galvanize so many voters despite all that he and his party had to suffer. I mean, they couldn't campaign.
Right. They would get thrown in jail. Yep. Basically, yeah. So, I mean, it's fascinating, or at least even if the politics are so wildly insufficient and very much the same, as you say, it at least represents an opposition and potentially a glimmer of hope for like breaking these kind of recalcitrant parties is basically my takeaway from speaking with you.
Sure. And there is one complicating factor, though. I mean, I think if you're not from Pakistan, you're a sort of a Western journalist and you're sort of observing this country, like the fact that you have the public coming out in support of Imran Khan in this way is sort of a heartening story. And actually, like as a Pakistani journalist, I find it, uplifting to an extent as well, even though I've never supported him. But as a progressive, the question is a little bit, the issue is a little bit more complicated. And what I mean by that is, if you look at any left-wing Pakistani, any progressive in this country, what they've always wanted is for democracy to take root, to really flourish, for the people's voice to be heard, and for change to be achieved through the ballot box, right? But the fact that a right-wing populist is the person who came closest to doing that is unsettling, or at least tempers the triumphant nature of this result, if that makes sense.
It certainly does. That's very helpful in my understanding, and then also just for our audience, if we're here in the West, it's just it's hard to discern from the way that many of our media and reporters cover this. So really appreciate your time today, Hasan Ali. We'll link to your piece in The Nation on this very topic wherever folks are listening to or watching this. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Really pleased to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you.